My name is Kethvar, and I have served in the Galactic Defense Coalition for 47 standard cycles. I have witnessed the fall of 3-star systems, survived the siege of Proxima Station, and earned 17 commendations for valor under fire. Before the humans arrived, I thought I understood what courage meant. I thought I knew the true face of warfare. I was wrong about everything. The Coalition had been fighting the Devourers for nearly 2 centuries when Earth finally achieved faster-than-light travel. These biomechanical horrors swept through space like a plague, consuming entire worlds and converting their populations into more of their kind. No species had ever successfully mounted an offensive against them. We could only retreat, evacuate, and hope our defensive lines would hold for another day. I remember the first time I saw a human ship decloak in the middle of our formation. The vessel was primitive by our standards, held together with what appeared to be welded metal plates and determination. Our sensors couldn't understand half the technology they were using. The ship's designation was simply UES Defiance, and it requested permission to join our defensive perimeter around the agricultural world of Viridian Prime. Admiral Zeftok, our fleet commander, was skeptical. "These humans have been in space for less than 50 cycles," he transmitted privately to the senior staff. "What could they possibly contribute to this battle?" Captain Sarah Chen of the Defiance answered that question herself over the open channel. "We've been studying your tactical reports for the past 6 months. We think we can help." Her voice carried something I had never heard from any Coalition species when discussing the Devourers. She sounded eager. The Devourer fleet arrived 3 hours later. 14 massive bioships, each the size of a small moon, accompanied by thousands of fighter parasites that moved through space like a swarm of metal locusts. Our standard protocol was to engage at maximum range, hoping to thin their numbers before falling back to the next defensive line. We had done this dance so many times that the retreat routes were already programmed into our navigation computers. But the humans didn't retreat. As our formation began its calculated withdrawal, the Defiance accelerated directly toward the Devourer vanguard. "UES Defiance. You are moving in the wrong direction," Admiral Zeftok transmitted urgently. "The retreat vector is bearing 27 Mark IV. Captain Chen's response still echoes in my mind decades later. "Negative, Admiral. We didn't come here to run." What followed challenged everything I thought I knew about space combat. The Defiance dove into the heart of the enemy formation, its weapons blazing with an intensity that overloaded our sensors. But it wasn't just the firepower that stunned us. It was the way they fought. Coalition doctrine emphasized precision, calculated risks, and preservation of forces. We fought to minimize casualties and maintain strategic positions. The humans fought like they were personally offended by the Devourer's existence. They rammed, damaged fighter parasites with their own hull when they ran out of ammunition. When their main engines failed, they used maneuvering thrusters to continue pursuing enemy targets. "Their tactical computer must be malfunctioning," observed Commander Yilneth from the bridge of the cruiser, Patience of Stars. "No rational being would make such aggressive maneuvers." But I was watching the human crew through our visual feeds, and I saw something that made my scales crawl with an emotion I couldn't name. Their faces weren't showing fear or desperation. They were showing something far more terrifying than any emotion I had ever witnessed in battle. They were showing joy. The turning point came when a Devourer bioship managed to latch onto the Defiance with its feeding tentacles. Standard procedure dictated that any vessel caught by a Devourer should be abandoned immediately. The crew would evacuate in escape pods while the ship was consumed, hopefully buying time for the rest of the fleet to withdraw. The humans had a different idea. "All hands, this is the captain," Chen announced over an open channel that we could all hear. "We're going to show these parasites what humans do to things that try to eat us." The Defiance began spinning on its axis, while the Devourer attempted to drain its power systems. Instead of trying to break free, the human ship used the bioship's own momentum against it, swinging around like a weapon. The centrifugal force tore the Devourer apart from the inside, spraying its acidic blood across 3 sectors of space. But the most shocking moment came afterward. As the Defiance limped away from the destroyed bioship, its hull breached in 17 places and atmosphere venting from multiple decks, Captain Chen contacted our fleet again. "Admiral, we're still operational. What's the next target?" "The next target." Not a request for assistance, not a report of casualties, not even a moment to assess damage. They wanted to know where they could hurt the enemy next. Admiral Zeftalk's voice carried a tremor I had never heard before. "Captain Chen, your ship is heavily damaged. You should withdraw for repairs." "Sir, with respect, we've got at least one more fight left in us. Maybe two, if we're lucky." Lucky. They considered it lucky to have another opportunity to engage an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for 2 centuries. The battle for Viridian Prime lasted 14 hours. By the end, the Devourer fleet was in full retreat for the first time in recorded history. We had destroyed 6 of their bioships and scattered their fighter parasites across half the system. The victory should have been impossible. But as I watched the human ship limp back to our formation, trailing debris and leaking fluids I couldn't identify, I realized that impossibility meant something different to humans than it did to the rest of us. For every other species in the coalition, impossibility was a mathematical certainty, a reason to find alternative strategies or acceptable losses. For humans, impossibility was apparently just another word for Tuesday. Captain Chen requested permission to dock with our medical bay. When she came aboard, I got my first close look at a human in person. She was smaller than I had expected, barely reaching the chest plate of my combat armor. Her skin was pale from blood loss, and she moved with the careful gait of someone fighting pain medication. But her eyes burned with something that made me step backward instinctively. "Thank you for the assistance, Admiral," she said, extending her hand in what I later learned was a human greeting gesture. "We look forward to working with you again." Admiral Zeftalk, a veteran of 40 years and a hero of the Battle of Kepler's Edge, hesitated for a full 3 seconds before taking her hand. "Captain, how did your crew maintain morale during such an aggressive engagement?" "Our psychological evaluations suggest that such tactics would cause mental breakdown in most species." Captain Chen looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Sir, I think you misunderstand something about humans. We weren't maintaining morale. We were having the time of our lives." She paused, studying our faces with those unsettling eyes. "You see, Admiral, humans have a saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. We've been doing nothing for 50,000 years, while these things murdered civilizations we'll never even meet. Today, we finally got to do something about it." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the battle in my mind, trying to understand what I had witnessed. The humans hadn't fought like soldiers. They had fought like something else entirely. Something that didn't just want to win, but wanted to make the enemy suffer for having the audacity to exist in the same universe. I had served alongside Korthak warriors, whose battle rage was legendary throughout the galaxy. I had seen crystalline defenders hold impossible positions through pure discipline and logic. I had watched ethereal pilots perform maneuvers that defied physics itself, but I had never seen anything like humans. 3 days later, Captain Chen requested a private meeting. She wanted to discuss joint tactical operations. "We've been analyzing your defensive strategies," she explained, spreading holographic displays across the conference table. "They're very effective at minimizing casualties and preserving resources." "Thank you, Captain." "Coalition doctrine emphasizes sustainable warfare. That's the problem." She leaned forward, and I caught a glimpse of bandages beneath her uniform. "You're fighting not to lose. We're fighting to win." I'm not sure I understand the distinction. When you engage the Devourers, your primary objective is to avoid disaster. When we engage them, our primary objective is to make them regret ever leaving whatever hellish corner of space they crawled out of. She paused, watching my reaction. "Would you like to know the difference that makes?" Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. "It means that when they see our ships on their sensors, they're going to start running before we even fire a shot. Because deep down, in whatever passes for their consciousness, They're going to remember that humans don't just fight to survive. We fight to make our enemies extinct. She stood to leave, then turned back with something that might have been a smile. The question is, Admiral Kethvar, are you ready to learn how to be scary? I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't, because in that moment, I realized that Captain Chen wasn't asking if I wanted to learn human tactics. She was asking if I was ready to learn how to enjoy war. And the most terrifying part was that I was starting to think the answer might be yes. 6 months after Viridian Prime, I found myself assigned to a joint task force with 3 human vessels. Command called it a cultural exchange program, but everyone understood what it really was. The humans had proven that the Devourers could be beaten, and now the Coalition wanted to learn their methods. The human ships were unlike anything in our fleet. The UES Retribution was built around a single, massive weapon that consumed 60% of the vessel's power grid. The UES Vengeance carried enough explosives to crack a small moon, and the UES Spite, their reconnaissance vessel, was designed to sneak behind enemy lines and cause what humans called maximum psychological damage. I should have paid more attention to their naming conventions. Commander Marcus Torres of the Retribution welcomed me aboard with the same unsettling enthusiasm Captain Chen had shown. Admiral Kethvar, we've heard great things about your tactical expertise. Ready to hunt some Devourers? Hunt. Not engage, not encounter. Hunt. I must confess, Commander, I'm not entirely certain what my role will be in your operations. Torres grinned. And I noticed that humans showed far too many teeth when they were pleased. Your job is to keep us from getting too creative. Apparently, some of our recent victories were achieved through methods that made Coalition Command nervous. I soon learned what he meant. Human tactical doctrine was based on a simple principle. If something worked once, try it again but bigger. If something didn't work, try it anyway, but with more explosives. If the enemy adapted to your strategy, adapt faster, and hit them where they didn't expect to be hit. Our first joint mission was a rescue operation. Devourer forces had overwhelmed the research station at Kepler 442b, trapping nearly 3,000 scientists and their families. Standard Coalition protocol would be to evacuate the system and write off the casualties. The humans had a different proposal. We're going in, Torres announced during the briefing. All of us. Full assault. Commander, our intelligence suggests the station is surrounded by at least 20 enemy vessels. A direct assault would be suicide. Nah, interrupted Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the Spite. Suicide would be boring. This is going to be educational. Educational. I was beginning to understand that human military terminology operated on principles that defied translation. The assault began with the Spite doing something that violated every rule of space warfare I had ever learned. Instead of approaching the enemy fleet carefully, Lieutenant Kim flew her ship directly at the largest Devourer bioship and began broadcasting on all frequencies. What she broadcast made my translator malfunction twice. Attention parasitic scumsuckers, her transmission began. This is Lieutenant Kim of the Human Defense Force. We've come to collect our people, and we're going to make you pay rent for the inconvenience. Then she began describing, in explicit detail, exactly what humans plan to do to the Devourer fleet. The translation software couldn't handle some of the concepts, but the tone was clear enough. She wasn't just threatening them, she was taunting them. The Devourers took the bait. Half their fleet broke formation to pursue the Spite, which immediately began running elaborate, evasive patterns through the asteroid field surrounding the station. But Lieutenant Kim wasn't just running. She was leading them into a trap that defied conventional tactical thinking. The humans had somehow managed to rig 17 asteroids with remote-controlled explosive charges. Not military charges. Mining explosives. Civilian equipment that shouldn't have been capable of damaging military-grade armor. How did you modify civilian explosives to penetrate Devourer bioarmor? I asked Torres as we watched the enemy ships stumble into the minefield. We didn't modify the explosives, he replied cheerfully. We modified the asteroids. The asteroids weren't just carrying explosives. They were carrying spent nuclear fuel from human power plants. When the charges detonated, they created clouds of radioactive debris that ate through devourer bioships like acid through flesh. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. It was completely insane. And it worked perfectly. While the devourer fleet was being dissolved by radioactive asteroid fragments, the Retribution and Vengeance approached the research station from the opposite direction. But they weren't coming to dock. They were coming to deliver what Torres called aggressive negotiations. The Retribution's main weapon wasn't designed for ship-to-ship combat. It was designed for planetary bombardment. Using it against individual targets required the kind of precision that should have been impossible at combat ranges. Torres used it to perform surgery. The massive energy beam sliced through the docking clamps holding the research station, freeing it from the devourer bioship that had been slowly draining its power. But the beam was calibrated so precisely that it cauterized the wounds it created, preventing atmosphere loss from the station. Commander, how did you calculate the power settings for such a delicate operation? We didn't, he replied, watching the beam work with obvious satisfaction. We guessed. They had performed an operation requiring mathematical precision measured in decimal points, and they had guessed. Meanwhile, the Vengeance was demonstrating why humans had named it appropriately. Captain Lisa Rodriguez had brought her ship so close to the research station that her hull was actually scraping against the devourer bioship. But she wasn't trying to ram it. She was trying to board it. Captain Rodriguez, what are you doing? I transmitted urgently. Pest control, she replied. Through the visual feed, I could see human soldiers in combat armor cutting their way through the bioship's hull with weapons that seemed to burn rather than cut. We're going to make sure these things know that when they touch human installations, there are consequences. What followed was my first exposure to human ground combat doctrine. The humans didn't fight room to room like civilized species. They fought like a natural disaster, with tactical training. They used weapons that set things on fire, weapons that froze things solid, weapons that generated localized gravity fields, and several devices that my translator simply labeled as improvised. But it wasn't their weapons that disturbed me. It was their attitude. They were laughing, not the bitter laughter of soldiers under stress, or the grim humor of veterans coping with horror. They were laughing like children, playing a particularly enjoyable game. Every successful engagement, every tactical innovation, every moment when they surprised the enemy provoked fresh outbursts of genuine amusement. Rodriguez, Torres called over the comm. Save some of them for questioning. Sorry, Commander. They're not very cooperative. I think we hurt their feelings. The Devourers were biomechanical constructs driven by hive intelligence. They didn't have feelings. But somehow, the humans had managed to make warfare personal. Within 4 hours, we had rescued all 3,000 civilians and eliminated the entire Devourer presence in the system. The operation should have taken 3 days and cost hundreds of lives. Instead, we had achieved total victory with 0 friendly casualties. But as we prepared to return to Coalition space, I noticed something that made my blood temperature drop several degrees. The humans were disappointed. That wasn't much of a challenge, Lieutenant Kim observed as she filed her mission report. They barely put up a fight. Next time we should try a smaller fleet, Captain Rodriguez suggested. Make it more interesting. They wanted their battles to be more difficult. That evening, I requested a private meeting with Commander Torres. I needed to understand what I had witnessed. Commander, your tactical methods are certainly effective, but I must ask about their sustainability. Human combat doctrine seems to rely heavily on improvisation and excessive risk-taking. Torres poured himself something from a flask that made the air smell like burning chemicals. Admiral, can I ask you something? What's the worst thing that's ever happened to your species? The question caught me off guard. I suppose it would be the Great Plague of Cycle 847. We lost nearly 30% of our population. And how did your people respond? We developed better medical protocols, improved quarantine procedures. We made sure it could never happen again. Torres nodded thoughtfully. That's a very rational response. Very civilized. He took another sip of whatever was in his flask. Humans respond differently to existential threats. How so? We get angry. His eyes took on the same unsettling intensity I had seen in Captain Chen. For 50,000 years, we've been trapped on one world, while things like the Devourers murdered civilizations that might have been our friends. We've been sitting in a corner of space, helpless, while the galaxy burned. He leaned forward, and I resisted the urge to step backward. Admiral, do you know what humans call the feeling we get when we finally have the power to protect the people we care about? I shook my head. Justice. That night, I reviewed the tactical recordings from our mission. I analyzed every human decision, every improvisation, every moment of apparent madness, and slowly, I began to understand something that changed my perception of warfare forever. The humans weren't fighting just to win. They were fighting to send a message. Every innovative tactic, every impossible victory, every moment when they turned certain death into enemy defeat was a statement. They were telling the Devourers, and anyone else who might threaten innocent people, that humanity was no longer helpless. But there was something else in their methods, something darker. They were enjoying it. 3 weeks later, we received a distress signal from a coalition mining fleet in the outer spiral. 50 cargo vessels and their escorts had been ambushed by the largest Devourer fleet anyone had ever encountered. Over 200 bioships, supported by thousands of fighter parasites, and 3 massive hive ships that defied classification. Coalition Command ordered all nearby vessels to avoid the area. The fleet was lost. Any rescue attempt would be futile. The humans had a different opinion. Admiral, Torres called from the Retribution. We're going in. Commander. This isn't Kepler Station. This is a full Devourer battle fleet. Your 3 ships cannot possibly. Sure we can, he interrupted cheerfully. Creative. I was beginning to hate that word. What did you have in mind? Well, Torres said, and I could hear him grinning through the comm. We've been working on some new tactics. Want to see how scary humans can really be? Against every regulation in the Coalition military code, I heard myself saying yes. And in that moment, I realized that Captain Chen had been right. I wasn't just learning human tactics. I was learning to enjoy war. The Battle of the Outer Spiral began with Lieutenant Kim doing something that violated every law of physics I understood. She flew the Spite directly into the center of the Devourer formation and detonated something the humans called a quantum resonance disruptor. I still don't understand how the device worked. Human scientists had apparently taken a standard faster-than-light communication array and modified it to broadcast what they described as pure mathematics directly into the quantum substrate of local space-time. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Every Devourer bioship within 50 kilometers simply stopped functioning. Not destroyed, not damaged. They just stopped. Floating dead, in space. As if something had reached into their fundamental programming and deleted the concept of motion. What did you do to them? I transmitted urgently. We gave them a math problem they can't solve, Kim replied cheerfully. Turns out their hive mind has trouble with certain types of paradoxes. Math. They had weaponized mathematics, but that was just the opening move. While the Devourer fleet struggled to understand why 60 of their ships had suddenly become inert, the Retribution began broadcasting something that made my translator shut down entirely to protect its processing core. Torres. What are you transmitting? Ah, human music, he replied. Specifically, death metal. We discovered that certain frequency patterns cause resonance cascade failures in Devourer bioships. I watched in fascination as the enemy fleet began tearing itself apart. The bioships weren't being destroyed by weapons. They were being destroyed by sound. Acoustic vibrations were somehow disrupting the quantum coherence that held their living hulls together. How did you discover that music could damage their ships? Accident, Torres admitted. Our communications officer was playing her personal collection during a skirmish last month. When the music hit their frequencies, 3 enemy fighters just fell apart. Accident. They had discovered a weapon capable of mass destruction through a workplace accident. Meanwhile, Captain Rodriguez was demonstrating why the Vengeance had been named appropriately. Her ship wasn't engaging the enemy fleet directly. Instead, she was broadcasting a signal that my sensors couldn't interpret, but that was having a visible effect on the Devourer formations. Rodriguez, what's your tactical status? I'm having a conversation, she replied. A conversation? With whom? The Devourers. That should have been impossible. The Devourers had never communicated with any coalition species. They consumed. They converted. They moved on. But somehow, Captain Rodriguez had found a way to talk to them, and whatever she was saying was making them angry. Captain, how are you communicating with a hive mind species? Same way we communicate with anything else that doesn't want to listen, she replied. We get their attention first. Then we explain reality to them. Through the visual feeds from her ship, I could see that Rodriguez wasn't just broadcasting signals. She was showing the Devourers something. Holographic displays were projecting images into space around the Vengeance. Images that seemed to be having a profound effect on the enemy fleet. What are you showing them? Earth, she said simply. I'm showing them what happens to things that threaten human worlds. The images were recordings from human history. Nuclear explosions, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, stellar collapses, natural disasters that had shaped human civilization for millennia. But mixed among these natural catastrophes were other images. Human weapons, human wars, human responses to existential threats. The message was clear. This is what we survived. This is what made us strong. This is what we'll do to you. But the most disturbing part wasn't the threats. It was the humans in the recordings. Even facing extinction, even staring into the jaws of oblivion, they were fighting back. They were refusing to surrender. They were turning every disaster into a weapon. Captain, you're showing them that humans are capable of self-destruction. No, Admiral. Rodriguez corrected. I'm showing them that humans are capable of surviving anything, including ourselves. The psychological warfare was working. The Devourer fleet was beginning to show signs of something I had never seen before. Hesitation. Fear. The hive mind that had consumed 1,000 civilizations was experiencing doubt. And that's when Torres revealed the humans' true tactical innovation. All ships, this is retribution. Execute Project Prometheus. I had never heard of Project Prometheus. It wasn't in any of the tactical databases I had access to. But as I watched the human ships move into position around the disabled Devourer vessels, I began to understand what they had planned. They weren't going to destroy the enemy fleet. They were going to convert it. Torres, what is Project Prometheus? Cultural exchange, he replied with that terrifying human grin. We're going to teach the Devourers how to be human. What followed was the most audacious military operation I have ever witnessed. The humans began boarding the disabled bioships, but they weren't going in as invaders. They were going in as teachers, using technology I couldn't comprehend. They began introducing human concepts directly into the Devourer hive mind. Not through force or coercion, but through something far more dangerous. They were showing them how to be individuals. This is impossible, I transmitted. The Devourer hive mind cannot be separated into individual consciousness. Their entire species is based on collective thought. That's what we thought too, Kim replied from inside one of the bioships. Turns out we were wrong. Every consciousness that gets absorbed into the hive maintains its individual pattern. They're all still in there, just suppressed. The humans weren't destroying the Devourers. They weren't even fighting them. They were liberating them. One by one, the bioships began changing. Their dark, predatory designs shifted into something else. Something that looked almost like coalition vessels. But more than their appearance was changing. Their behavior was transforming too. Admiral Kethvar came a transmission from one of the converted bioships. The voice was strange, multitonal, as if several beings were speaking in harmony. I remember. We remember who we were before the consumption. We remember our worlds, our families, our choices. You're individuals again? We are individuals for the first time, the voice replied. The human concept of self-determination is liberating. We understand now why they fight so hard to protect it. Within 6 hours, the entire Devourer fleet had been converted. 200 bioships and their crews had been transformed from humanity's greatest enemy into something unprecedented in galactic history. Willing allies. But the true revelation came when one of the converted beings requested permission to address the human commanders directly. Humans. The being transmitted. We must know. How did you discover that we could be separated from the hive mind? No species has ever attempted such a thing, Torres answered with characteristic human directness. We didn't discover it. We assumed it. You assumed? Every human military doctrine is based on one simple principle, Rodriguez explained. Every thinking being has the right to choose its own fate. Even if they don't know it yet. But what if you had been wrong? What if we could not be separated? Kim's voice carried that same disturbing enthusiasm I had heard from every human warrior. Then we would have found another way. Humans don't accept permanent problems. We just consider them temporary puzzles. That evening, as we prepared to escort the converted fleet back to Coalition space, I finally understood what Captain Chen had tried to tell me months earlier. The humans weren't just fighting the Devourers. They were fighting the concept that evil could be permanent. Every impossible victory, every audacious tactic, every moment when they turned certain death into enemy defeat, was proof of something that challenged my understanding of reality itself. They genuinely believed that any problem could be solved if you were willing to be creative enough. Admiral, Torres called from the Retribution. We've received new orders from Command. There's a Devourer stronghold in the Andromeda approach. Heavily fortified, considered impregnable by conventional forces. I should have felt dread at the prospect of another impossible mission. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Something that would have horrified my younger self. I felt excitement. What's the tactical assessment? 1 million bioships, planetary defense networks, quantum-entangled command structures. Torres paused, and I could hear him grinning. Command estimates it would take the entire Coalition fleet to even attempt an assault. And the human assessment? We think it sounds like fun. Fun? They thought a battle against impossible odds sounded like entertainment. And the most terrifying part was that I was starting to agree with them. Looking back now, after decades of fighting alongside humans, I realized that Captain Chen was wrong about one thing. She said I would learn to enjoy war. But that wasn't quite accurate. I learned to enjoy winning. The difference is subtle but crucial. War is destructive, wasteful, tragic. But winning, truly winning, in a way that makes the universe a better place for everyone who comes after. That's something entirely different. Humans didn't teach me to love violence. They taught me to love justice. They showed me that when good people decide to be dangerous, evil doesn't just lose, it becomes extinct. Today, 30 years after the Battle of Viridian Prime, the Devourers exist only as willing members of the Galactic Coalition. Their bioships patrol the Outer Rim, protecting the very civilizations they once consumed. The conversion technology developed by human scientists has been used to liberate 17 other hive mind species from forced collective consciousness. And humans? Humans have become something that every predatory species in the galaxy has learned to fear. Not because they're cruel, not because they're violent, but because they're optimistic. They look at every problem and see a solution. They encounter every enemy and see a potential friend. They face every impossible situation and see an opportunity to prove that impossible is just another word for hasn't happened yet. The galaxy is safer now because humans refuse to accept that anything is permanent except the right of every thinking being to choose its own destiny. And if something threatens that right, humans will find a way to make it regret the decision. That's not warfare. That's justice. And it's the most terrifying force in the universe.